Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we've got another really fun one. It's been a while, but we are returning to one of my absolute favorite brewers, doing a review of two different beers and different styles from Ommegang, the kind of Belgian-style master based out of New York. They're based out of Cooperstown specifically. Today we're going to be starting with Rare Voss. This is an amber ale that's been brewed with orange peel, coriander, and grains of paradise. Clocks in at 6.5% ABV. And then number two, we are moving on to their Abbey Ale. This is a double, Belgian-style double, of course, and it's been brewed with licorice root, orange peel, and other spices. So they didn't specify what the other spices are, so part of the fun of this one's going to be see if we can detect what some of those are. This one a bit higher ABV at 8.2%. Nonetheless, it's been a while since we've done an Ommegang review, and I'm really excited to jump in two new ones, both of which I have never had prior, so I'm very anxious to see what these two are about. So we're going to jump in and get started with the Rare Voss. This is the Amber Ale, clocking in at 6.5% ABV. Okay, so jumping into our first beer of today's Ommegang review, we've got Rare Voss. This is an amber ale brewed with orange peel, coriander, and grains of paradise. 6.5% ABV on this one. So I'm gonna take a quick peek at the label art here. It's got a fox with what looks like a pigeon on its back and a beautiful tulip glass full of some beer, presumably their own. You know, that's about the extent, and it's got a different color scheme. They have similar kind of labels. They tend to have this argyle-like pattern, which I'm a personal fan of. I wear argyle socks nearly every day of my life. But it looks very cool, and I'm a big fan. So let's get this one cracked and poured in the glass. And while I'm taking a peek at this, before we jump into the beer, I'm going to go a little bit more in depth here than I have maybe in some other reviews, because this has come up in a few other beers, and I want to make sure we have a clear understanding of one of the ingredients that's in this beer. Didn't get the whole thing in there. I actually formed a nice head, and that is indeed a beautiful, beautiful shade of amber. It's a stunningly beautiful beer. It is not cloudy. It's nice and clear, no particulates floating in there, and formed a pretty good head. And it's got pretty active effervescence there. So I'm going to let that settle so I can get the rest of the beer in. While I am doing that, let's go into this ingredient list that they put in this beer. Orange peel, everybody knows. Coriander, I talked about in an episode or two ago. That is the seed of the cilantro plant. You can call the plant coriander. You can call it cilantro, as in the herb that's common in Tex-Mex and Mexican cuisine. The seeds of that plant are known in America, at least, as coriander seeds. The plant itself in America, typically we call cilantro. In other countries, like I know in Britain, I believe they call both the seeds and the herb itself coriander. They don't call it cilantro, but it is the same plant. It's the seeds of that plant are coriander. Grains of paradise are specifically what I want to talk about. It's a little bit of a misnomer in the name. It's not a grain at all. It's used as a spice. Grains of paradise are actually in the ginger family, and they're pretty stinking closely related to cardamom, which is another pretty common seasoning you'll see in beers relatively often. That is, it comes in a little pod. It's small, maybe about the size of a little bit bigger than a sunflower seed and smaller than a pistachio. It's kind of somewhere in between them, and it looks a bit like a pistachio in terms of the fact that it's green, and it's got a pungent licorice-like, black licorice-like aroma and flavor to it. So grains of paradise are in that same family, and they can impart different flavors. Really, they can impart kind of orange, as well as pretty common a peppery, similar to black pepper specifically, kind of aroma and flavor. They can also be a little bit floral, a little bit buttery, and they do have some character traits that are in common with, indeed, coriander as well. So they kind of run the gamut, but they're a good additive for that kind of spice family that you're going for. They work well in winter ales and a lot of different styles, and certainly an amber ale that's spiced like this, Grains of Paradise would be a great choice in my opinion. We'll find out how well it works. Now that you have an idea of what grains of paradise are, let's see if we can get this topped off, reforming that beautiful head. All right. Since we already checked this one out, still looks great. Let's give it a sniff. That smells very nice. It smells like it's got a nice amber ale, classic scented malty back to it, but you can smell the spices that they put in there. It does smell quite bright and fruity, and indeed citrus is the main kind of aroma I'm detecting here outside of the malts. Very bright. You can absolutely smell that orange, and it actually smells like a little bit of lemon, which could be coming in from the grains of paradise. Orange peel, any of those other additives, they can add different aromas as well. And I expect it's going to impart some to the flavor, but it smells like a nice mix of malt and citrus, and actually it's got a little bit of an appley aroma to it. So it's kind of putting me in mind of apple cider, which smells really good. Not really cinnamony, not really clovey, which are two common spices added to apple cider, but the apples in particular, almost like an apple pie, like baked apples is what it smells like. It smells really, really good. So let's jump right in, see what it tastes like. Oh, that's delicious. Oh, this puts me in mind of so many fantastic beers. Okay, it's unique unto its own. Now, first thing I can tell you is the very first thought that sprung into my mind was Hefeweizen. And it's not brewed with Hefeweizen yeast, to be certain. The grains of paradise, which as we discussed are related to cardamom, and in the ginger family, and can impart all of these different flavors, which they're definitely coming through. Clove is one of the qualities it can impart, and that actually pairs well with some of the aromas I was getting, that kind of apple cidery aroma that mixed with the orange and the citrus and the base malts. It's coming through in the beer, and it absolutely, the classic peppery bit that you get from grains of paradise, that's making it into the beer, as well as a more clovey, cardamom-like side. Cardamom and clove, they're kind of similar. They kind of run in between one another. Cardamom splits the difference in my mind of clove and black licorice root. It's got those same kind of character traits, and it kind of splits the difference and is an amalgam of both. Grains of paradise kind of mimic that, but with some additional other aromatic and flavor profile traits that really made its way into this beer. It's really quite nice, but not just tasting like a Hefeweizen. This actually almost puts me in mind of a winter warmer or a classic winter spiced ale. Just the additives that they added in spice-wise, and it goes so well with their amber ale malt bill. This is very enjoyable. It's like a brighter, bigger, maybe fruitier, more flavorful. I hesitate to even say it because it's going to sound like a knock on the brewer, and I don't mean that so, but this puts me in mind of a lot of Unibrew beers where you get that kind of Hefeweizen-like quality, but you know there's no Hefeweizen yeast in it. It's got that clovey back, but it's got a boatload of spices, and it's just big and bold, and it's bright. And it's got some weight to it. This is not a heavy beer, but it's certainly medium heavy. So since I've talked a bit about the flavor profile, and we'll explore fully how it opens up and goes through in the finish, let's make sure we get this body and mouthfeel exactly right. For a 6.5%, it's big, but overall, in terms of all beer styles, I'd say it's medium heavy. So it's definitely got more presence than you would expect for 6.5 in an amber ale. Mouthfeel, it's close to being silky, and it gets quite creamy. It's very effervescent. You can feel it, and it's got some viscosity. It's thick. This is a bigger beer, certainly much bigger than the ABV would let on. It's got a lot of presence rolling around on the palate and in the mouth, that's for sure. I'm going to jump in for one more sip and see if I can explain all the flavors I'm getting and where they're popping in and how it finishes out. First bit in your mouth, fruity, apricots, apples, malt, slight booze back. Opens up with big clove, and fruity mixes with that citrus up front, by the way. Big clove, black pepper, orange peel, ginger, cardamom, clove, even hints of nutmeg and cinnamon. That's why it's reminding me so much of apple cider and a winter warmer. Kind of all of those really fragrant, really flavorful, similar like spices that you would pair together. It's all coming through in this beer. There's a little bit of a buttery sense to it. Not so much floral. It's much more in line with the spice side than it is getting into the herby side of Grains of Paradise, but it's very enjoyable and it absolutely works in this beer. That kind of intensifies as you keep tasting all of these, and they're just melding and popping in one out of the other. And once it hits the flavor apex, it's a very slow, steady bell curve decline. It's not a nosedive straight down. It's a nice, even, steady curve out that just finishes out very, very slowly. It's got a long, long finish to it. What you're left with at the very end of each sip is predominantly clove, citrus, specifically orange, a little bit of a buttery back and a little bit of a peppery back to it. That's kind of the four elements that are sticking out to me the most as it finishes off, and you can taste all of them independently. Nothing's really overriding. Actually, I'll take that back. The clovey, cardamom-like presence that the Grains of Paradise are bringing to the table, that's maybe a little bit higher than the other elements, and probably pepper second behind that, but it's not far off. It's pretty even, and it's got a nice long finish. Each sip is very, very long. You get rewarded with this one much like you do with a really big Imperial Stout, where you sip on it and really think on every sip exactly what you're tasting and experiencing, and it just keeps going and going and going and gets a little more complex and finishes out where you never really expected. That's what this beer reminds me of. Fantastic beer. I absolutely love it. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, count my scores. When we come back, we're going to get to our second beer. That's the Abbey Ale. It's a Belgian-style double, brewed with licorice root, orange peel, and other spices, which I'm curious to see if I can pick out. And that one clocks in at 8.2% ABV. Okay, now moving on to our second beer of today's Ommegang review. We've got their Abbey Ale. This is a Belgian-style double. It is brewed with licorice root, orange peel, and spices. 8.2% ABV on this one. Spices is a bit vague. I guess they didn't want to give away their specific blend, but I'm going to see what I can pick out when we get this cracked. Label art, much like the last one, it's got that same typical kind of Argyle pattern. This one's more of a burgundy red shade, and it's got what looks like a couple of Greek philosophers or some such in togas, cheersing each other with a couple of goblets of some beer there. So let's get this one cracked. All right. Poured right in the old glass. Okay. Visually, this looks remarkably similar to the Rare Voss that we just tried. And it's forming a decent head there too. I won't be able to quite get the whole bottle in just yet, but that's okay. Let's hold it up to light. Actually, holding it up to light, this one's quite a bit darker. As I was pouring it, it looked about the same shade, but it's quite a bit denser and thicker. And indeed, I actually can't see through this all that well. It looks a bit murky, a bit occluded, so it is a little cloudy in appearance. I'm guessing that it's from the spices that are in there and just depth of color in tandem. So there's probably some fine particulate matter that's suspended that's making it not look crystal clear, which is okay. And we'll get this topped off now. Perfect. Quite effervescent, as was the last one. Formed a decent head, but I don't expect it's going to stick around too long. Let's give this a sniff. Smells very nice. On the nose, it smells rather like a classic Belgian double. You can pick up a little bit of the orange, but I can't get really any hint of the licorice. It smells like other spices, maybe nutmeg, maybe cinnamon. Not 100% on what else they may have put in here, so I'm just guessing based on perceived aroma. But it smells nice. It smells fruity and bright and Like it's going to be deep and caramelly, but have a nice kind of spice kick to kick it in another direction is rather what I anticipate. So let's jump in, give this a sip. Ooh, that's a big one. It's got a little bit of a boozy back to it. Not uncommon for a Belgian double or triple. They are bigger beers. They too tend to get a bit of a booze kick to them. This one's no exception. Flavor-wise, it's interesting. It's a little hard to pinpoint, but I'm getting a myriad of flavors here. It's very complex. It's got a lot happening here at once. I'm really going to have to dive in to see exactly where all these flavors play out, but I can tell you I got a big mouthful of booze. I got a classic Belgian double kind of malt bill that came through, a boatload of caramel that came through. What tastes like cinnamon and mixing with the orange peel, maybe even a hint of cardamom, though that could be from the licorice root. They taste remarkably similar, as do Grains of Paradise. They can. It's that same flavor, star anise. There's a few things that have similar flavor profiles, and they all remind me of licorice root, or what black licorice candy, the standard flavor of that is. There's many different spices and herbs that taste a lot like that. Body is medium heavy, 8.2%. Not surprising. It's got some girth to it. Mouthfeel, it's not smooth per se, but it's got a thickness to it. If you aggressively roll it around the palate to try to let the flavors stick all around, it does start to cream up, but inherently it's not particularly creamy. It's quite effervescent and thick at the same time, which is kind of typical for a Belgian double. I don't normally expect them to be super creamy just due to the nature of the style, but yeah, this beer is very, very complex. I'm going to jump in now, see if I can pinpoint where all these flavors develop and how it finishes out. It's got a long finish. Up front, slight sweetness, slight fruitiness, and big booziness. That opens into a classic Belgian double malt bill and a big pack of booze. And then that opens up into more fruity kind of flavors. You can get the orange peel and it mixes with what tastes like cinnamon, but there's also kind of an apricot flavor that comes in. Spice-wise, you can get the licorice root. It kind of reminds me, it's a little milder. It doesn't put me in mind quite so much as cardamom. Maybe a mild hand of star anise, which is a little bit more mild in terms of that flavor intensity. Tastes like a hint of nutmeg, and it tastes like a hint of cinnamon. That could be the two spices. I could be wrong, but that's at least what I'm perceiving. And it mixes very well with that orange peel and the base character of a Belgian double. Those spices really lend well and pair well with this style. It's very big, it's very long. The caramel keeps coming back. There's that underlying boozy quality that's still there, and it's quite rich, and it feels quite heavy, and the spices really, really work with this. I'm liking what's happening with the beer. It's got a very long finish. The way that it ramps up in its flavor intensity isn't over the top, to be perfectly honest. It definitely blooms up in intensity, but it's much more kind of like the first one was. A mishmashing of all of these flavors that just keep coming in and out of one another, and then it kind of peaks in intensity, and there's nothing really that is kind of at the apex that you can say, oh, that's the key flavor. They're all just kind of spinning around inside of one another and back in and out again, and then it just slowly dissipates as it comes down the bell curve in terms of intensity. But you can still just keep tasting these independent flavors. They just keep popping in and out. Caramel, orange, cinnamon, licorice, what tastes like nutmeg. Rather, I should say what tastes like cinnamon, what tastes like nutmeg. I don't know. I'm guessing that might be two of the spices that they added. Interplaying with this caramel and this boozy undertone. And it's very long on each sip. Now, at the end of the finish, there is definite flavor flavors rather that are left. There's the classic Belgian double malt bill that you get, and it's quite caramelly undertone to it, and then just kind of that fleeting orange and what tastes like cinnamon and nutmeg to me. Those are kind of the dominant flavors at the very, very end of the finish until it just disappears to nothing left on the palate. But it does have a very, very long finish indeed. I would say overall, this is a very well balanced beer. You still get the classic heart of a Belgian double. The malt bill comes through crystal clear in the flavor profile. All of the spices come through. None of them really overshadow at all. They just keep interplaying and interplaying with that classic Belgian double malt bill. And that's a really good way to build a good beer if you're going to spice it. Let everything work together. Let all the independent parts have their voice without anything overshadowing anything else, particularly for a style like this. It's a big, big beer. It's very complex. It's got a lot of flavors happening, and it gives you a lot to think about on each sip. This is very tasty indeed. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, count my scores, and when we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both of these beers, we're going to get them ranked. Starting with the Rare Voss. This one, again, was the Amber Ale at 6.5% ABV. Both Ommegang based out of Cooperstown, New York. This specific Amber Ale was brewed with orange peel, coriander, and grains of paradise. So starting off with the aroma. This did have a pretty pronounced aroma. You could smell it from a reasonable distance away. Not as pungent as some. It wasn't one you could get from 1.5 feet, 2 feet away. But when you got within a few inches and really got in there, it really opened up, and it was quite pronounced and gave you a good idea of what the beer was going to be about. Gave it an 8 out of 10. For the taste, this was fantastic. Really, really nice amber ale. Overall, I thought it was an excellent balance of flavors that they added in, as well as the base malt. Really, the only thing that I would have liked had been if there were just a little bit more of the malt backbone that came through, because there were so many dynamics happening with the spices, and those came through very strongly. But they were in such abundance that kind of overshadowed the malt just a tick. I only docked 1 point. I gave it a 9. For the body, this was a really robust body that was fantastic and really even better than I thought it was going to be for the ABV range. I gave it a perfect 10 out of 10. For the mouthfeel on this one, this beer was very nice. It had some viscosity to it. In fact, quite a bit more than I anticipated for 6.5% ABV. And when it started rolling around the palate, it really thickened up and worked with the natural viscosity it did have and just ended up going super creamy. Gave it a 10 out of 10. Finish on this, very, very, very long. All of the spices that they put in this beer really kept interplaying, and mixed with the malt and just kept coming back in abundance and popping in and really extended the length on this. Even though it's not a hoppy beer style, the spices were so heavy-handed that they really extended the length in tandem with just kind of it sticking around the palate. It gets a 10 out of 10. Head and retention. Didn't anticipate it, but the head on this and the retention on this was very, very good. Certainly well above average. I only docked 1 point. I gave it a 9 out of 10. Appearance-wise, this was an absolutely lovely amber ale. That's pretty much what I expect to see. Gets a 10 out of 10. Balance on this. Similar to the taste, same thing really that I had that I docked a point here. I gave it a 9, and it's really, as much as I really enjoyed the spices, I would have liked a little more malt to come through. The spices were just a bit heavy in terms of balance, and it did affect balance, obviously, in the flavor. In terms of feeling in the intangible, really, really enjoyed this beer. I missed giving it 1 point, and it's going to keep coming back to the same little nitpick item. It just had to do with the balance of the spices in comparison to the malt. But excellent. I mean, top tier, 9 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, gets a 9 out of 10 for me here as well. I docked a point due to the same reason across multiple categories, and was a couple lower on the aroma. But overall, this is an absolute top tier Belgian-style amber ale. I really enjoyed what they did with it. I thought that they chose their spices very well, that all worked together, and it made for a very, very enjoyable beer drinking experience. Total score on the Rare Voss is a 93 out of 100. So well worth seeking out if you're a fan of this style, or indeed just Ommegang beers in general. Number 2, this is Abbey Ale. This is the Belgian-style double, brewed with licorice root, orange peel, and various spices. 8.2% ABV on this one. Just as with the Rare Voss, the aroma, it gets the same score for the same reason. It's an 8. For the taste, I really enjoyed this one. For me, honestly, I would have liked a little more spice in this one. The Belgian double style, the malt is so heavy and the flavor of that is so distinct, and it can end up being so boozy. And this one did have a nice boozy kick to it, which I don't mind. It's a high ABV beer, but I would have liked a little more spice to help offset the intensity of the malt and the booziness that comes with the territory in brewing a Belgian double. But I only docked 1 point. It was very, very close for me. I gave it a 9. For the body, this was a big body on a high ABV beer. I would say that's exactly what I expected and wanted, and it delivered. It got a 10 out of 10. For the mouthfeel on this one, same as with the prior for the same reason. This one was not quite creamy as much, but a Belgian double isn't really supposed to be. It actually had a little bit of that character trait, but it was so viscous and so thick and so effervescent. That was the real character traits that came through in the mouthfeel, and that's exactly what I expect in a Belgian double. It gets a 10 out of 10. Finish on this one, equally as long as on the Rare Voss. Those spices just extended it, even though they didn't come through as heavily in the front side. On the back end of the finish, that's where the spices really kind of shine through and came through for me and really extended that finish out and kept interplaying with the malt and the booze. But it was a very, very long finish indeed. It gets a 10 out of 10. Head and retention on this one, it was okay. It was above average, but it didn't form the biggest head in the world, and I didn't really anticipate it to, but it did collapse quite a bit quicker than I did anticipate, even for the style. I gave it high end of average. I gave it 6. For the appearance, this was a very lovely Belgian double, though for my assessment, it was quite a bit darker than the norm. Not outlandishly out of the range for color for a double, but it was a good bit darker than you typically see. I did dock 1 point. I gave it a 9. Balance on this, even though I would have liked more spices, the way that they interplayed, particularly at the midway and down to the end of the finish, and I teeter-tottered on this one, I still gave it a perfect score for the balance, because deep down at their heart, Belgian doubles tend to be very, very boozy and very, very malt forward. And even though they took the time to spice, I would have liked more of those. It's hard to fault it in terms of balance of brewing a good example of a spiced version of the style. I think that it was balanced well, and certainly for the beer style, it absolutely was. I went with my gut. I gave it a 10 out of 10. Feeling an intangible. Now, when I get to my subjective, this is where I docked a point for the reason I didn't on the balance. I would have liked a little more spice. Even though for the style, bravo, my subjective feeling, I would have liked a little more. I gave it a 9. Finally, as an example of the style, I did dock some points on a few categories here, but a good Belgian double is one of the beer world's really great treats. And honestly, Ommegang is one of the best brewers of the Belgian styles. They're up there with Unibrew for my money. You know, anybody that can pull those off that doesn't have those hundreds and hundreds of years of Belgian brewing history under their belt, I'm a massive fan. And I think they brew very consistent, excellent Belgian-style beers, and this was no exception. Even though I did nitpick and dock a few points in a few categories, I think as an example of a Belgian double, this is top tier. So I did give it a 10 out of 10, and that brings the total score on the Abbey Ale to a 91 out of 100. So all total, we're only looking at a 2-point spread here, 93 versus a 91. Ommegang, yet again, putting out nothing but top tier beers. Everything I have by them is just absolutely fantastic. I'm always keeping my eye out for new beers that they put out to grab and to try, and I'm really glad I got my hands on these. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Likes help the channel, help others find us. Subscribe will keep our videos in your feed, and if they ever fall out, you can just click your subscriptions, jump straight to the channel. And comments, I want to hear from you. I want to know your thoughts, opinions, feelings, questions, suggestions, what you like, dislike. Let me know down in the comments. Lastly, if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, you can click the notification bell icon. It is right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.